So the second and last requested review for this month is by Arthur D. Gonzalez Martin, and he's requested I do a little game called The 10th Line. Never heard of The 10th Line? Well, I don't know how many would have, especially me. But it was released March of 2017 for PC before getting a PS4 release in June of the same year. It was developed by Sungazer Software, an indie studio in South Carolina who's been around since 2014, with this being their first game commercially released. The owner of the studio, Elliot, used to make feature-length freeware games prior to making the studio, which you can read up more on Sungazer's own website. Given the game's setting and main characters, I am curious to see where they go with this, and what kind of world I'm to expect, especially one made with Unity in mind. So, let's play The 10th Line! The plot involves a princess, literally just called the Princess, escaping from her captors in some bramble-filled area where she runs into a couple of beastmen, a kobold named Rick and a black Draco mage named Tox. With their help, she's able to evade her captors, but now needs to find a way back home to her kingdom in Isania, and despite her somewhat entitled behavior as royalty is to commoners, they do agree to help on the prospect of being rewarded. So they set off on a journey to make it to her homeland while dealing with the cult responsible for her kidnapping, finding new allies along the way, and dealing with issues that may lead to the end of the world, as foretold on the lines. As you can see, the game is done with a 2D platformer style with an RPG system to boot. Similar to Radiant Historia, enemies are placed along 3 rows and columns that can go pretty far back. You attack by selecting an ability based on how much SP you have, with the cards showing what kind of effects they have, like how many attacks it can do, if it can heal, and so forth, which is vital for deciding how you want to go about killing enemies, since this game does have you attack whichever row or spot is closest to you, unless the ability allows the character to hit past the initial spot. When attacking, you activate that character's skill by pressing their corresponding button. For the PS4, circle is for the princess, X is for Rick, and square is for Tox. These same buttons allow the characters to defend themselves while the enemy is attacking. You can hold a triangle to end your attack if you feel like there are no more enemies you can reach, but otherwise, depending on if you defeat an enemy, do well in defending, or just hit hard in general, you build up momentum, which regenerates your SP quicker, allowing you to use your stronger moves sooner. Of course, moves will have a cooldown period, so it's best to rest periodically to recover health and SP, especially if you manage to build up their SP to the max, because then you can perform their super move. Just a matter of knowing when and how to attack to really build up your power. Another thing in battle is that each character has a super defense, which allows you to protect the whole party from one kind of attack, based on the character by holding down R2 and their respective button. The princess blocks all melee attacks while restoring HP in the process. Rick blocks ranged attacks while sending them back at the enemy, as well as avoid aerial enemies in the process. And Tox blocks magic while increasing his affinity to the element he was attacked with. You can tell if your character has their guard ready by the star under their SP bar, as it has a cooldown of 3 turns. So don't do what I did in ignoring it early on. It does come in handy numerous times. Now, while the main party is comprised of these 3, you do gain assist party members who join you during the story and are capable of attacking with either L1 or R1. Then, if you manage to build up their SP to the max, you can perform their super move. Whenever you level up, you get a level that you can use to spend on a flowchart of sorts, where you place material items you get from enemies, quests, and the like, and each one has a glyph that, if you match to a corresponding color while building a power line to various abilities, you can increase your stats even further than just simply putting any glyph in. This way, if you feel like you can hold out until getting a certain item, you can try building toward other skills, or just power through and get it over with. And since you can replace existing glyphs with better stats, it's very well possible to fill the whole board and maybe even have everything that connects. Granted, I thought later on you could remove these stone blocks that litter the whole board, but I guess you can't. Movement on the field is a little tricky. Basically, while characters will follow you around, you do have to switch between them to get them up platforms and the like. It's kinda like the Lost Vikings in that aspect, and if not everyone is present, they may not get to participate in a battle, and depending on where the characters are, they have to wait a turn or two. However, each character has a specialty in traversing the field, like the princess being able to move heavy objects, Rick being able to throw things that can even knock down objects from high places, and Tox having different elemental breaths that can do various things both on the field and in battle. What sucks is the fact you have to move everyone separately, and because of how they move or jump, clearing obstacles requires a lot of patience, since one false step and you could get sent back to the side of the screen you came in from. Leaving the area and coming back will reset certain blocks that might have gotten stuck and return items that were lost in the abyss that is the pits. But it can get really annoying to bump into enemies, which always causes an ambush, and possibly get swarmed with only one character who can fight while you wait for backup. You have to attack an enemy either from the front or behind. At least it's satisfying to surprise attack them by distracting the enemies with one group and then have another party member attack them from behind. Now, knowing that I mostly play as the princess, Rick, and Tox, I figured they would get the most character development out of everybody, while any assist characters would get very minimal. Not quite the case. In some ways, everyone who joins you has a story to be told, and some relate to the main cast. For instance, Sonia, a huntsfolk you meet in the Indigo Times, is trying to kill Tox because she and many others believe he is one of the ones who will end up destroying the world. After all, the other lines have been fulfilled, and you do find that the 6th line was fulfilled with this one Draco Mage who joined you on your journey. Lawrence, the brawler you meet early on, has a history with the cult and what they did to his daughter, and ends up attracting them to your group so he could hopefully destroy them while you run away. They lend themselves to the overall plot, which is tied to this belief that the world will end due to a prophecy that was written long ago, and that as each of the 10 lines are fulfilled, the world moves closer to the end. This leads to many people, humans and beastmen alike, to discriminate those who would be tied to these teachings. In particular, Tox and his Draco variants are the most persecuted because of how the word black gets brought up a lot, how it becomes the prime, and how the 10th line seems to indicate they would mourn the world, even though the lines aren't very clear themselves. Yet it's because of these lines that can cause anyone to change their tune upon seeing someone like Tox, such as in the case of Lux, who is a white Draco Mage who is always seen coughing and is well regarded with the kingdom he's working with. Whenever the princess interacts with him, he seems helpful and kind, even convincing her to not just leave her friends because she may think being around them would hurt them. But then, once he sees Tox, he's suddenly all witch hunter on us as he wants him dead. It even becomes clear that he's been killing many like Tox during his crusade because of how it might prevent the 10th line from coming to be. And because of how the world treated them, many seem set on actually fulfilling the 10th line out of spite. Even though the game isn't particularly long compared to other RPGs, the story is at least engaging and makes you want to see more of what comes. In a way, it reminds me of old RPGs I've played like Golden Sun, where the plot doesn't need to be incredibly long, but just interesting enough that you want to see what happens next. And while the gameplay tends to be mixed on having unique but fun combat and good to meh platforming, I was pretty much set on doing as much as I can. The game does offer a few side features that give you decent rewards, One of them is the game Quad Pro Quo, a card game where you try to place as many cards on the table as you can while capturing your opponent's cards by having higher number values on whatever side they're facing, which can be affected by elemental type multipliers. Also, each major dungeon area has a treasure hunt at the rally posts, which act as save posts, where if you find all the treasure chests and knock down certain things, you can get something good. And these do include weapon upgrades, which aren't really that noticeable, but I guess they increase your overall power. Now, given the game's length, I didn't know whether I wanted to summarize the rest of the plot or not, and honestly, despite being rather short, I think it had the potential of going about the length of double or AAA RPGs that go for as long as 30 to 40 hours, which could have provided a lot more development for the main cast and world. For an indie-developed game, there are some compelling story bits and themes of betrayal and surprising reveals that it makes me want to see more. But if you really want to know what happens, press on. Otherwise, skip to my final thoughts here, since we're getting into spoiler territory. Okay, so after encountering one of the main Black Draco mages, who's trying to convince Tox to join them later, the group ends up in Rick and Tox's old home, where they once promised never to return because when they were kids, Tox ended up killing a few people because they attacked their foster parents. Rick runs away during this backstory reveal and ends up overhearing Lux and his plans, which leads hunters back to the house. Vax, the red Draco mage they met in a cave, stays behind to act as a distraction and, well... Yep, looks like he just up and died. Thankfully, you can get him back as an assist through buying him, but much like games that have ways of letting you play as other characters, canonically speaking, he is indeed dead. Tox gets mad at Rick for this, even though it was his own fault for bringing them to this house that caused the trauma, which gets Rick forced out of the group. From there, he ends up in the Wastelands, where he finds other beast folk who have nowhere else to go, and through helping them out, he starts to learn what it means to help one another, not to be selfish, and soon returns to the group, willing to see his job through to make up for what he did. After that, we encounter Lux in a rather difficult fight, and of course, the falling snowdrifts force us to leave, though not before the princess tries saving him. Two major deaths in this game. Also, Lux becomes purchasable after this. When they arrive outside the city, they encounter the cult that was after them, and their leader, the Tall Man, who reveals that the princess is actually not a princess, but an orphan named Anne, who, as it's shown later on, has a birthmark that's necessary for some ritual involving white energy, which to the Black Drakons trying to fulfill the ninth line is a bad thing. Which is why Tox ends up being tasked with escorting her to safety, and Rick still wishing to save her given everything they've done. What becomes of this is that Anne wants to see if anything can be done to stop what's coming, for as it turns out, there's some kind of white energy being that exists in this ancient city that the cult quells every 10 years by a sacrifice of maidens who have the same energy. It seems to be implied that it existed for as long as the lines have, and it's only now that the Black Drakons are deciding to take action against it, knowing there's a chance that they'll end up destroying the world with their toxic breath. So we fight the Tall Man. They never give him a real name or anything. And while he seems to be the main antagonist, he is not the final boss. When we beat him, he tells us we can attempt to leave, knowing that the world is about to be destroyed by what is below, and it's a mass of white energy. Given you're fighting what appears to be a former maiden encased in white energy, with white hands that power its shield. Now, if there's one thing this game could have benefited from being longer, is having better boss fights. Each one would have waves upon waves of enemies that keep coming until they die, as well as a super move that's usually magic oriented, meaning you need Tox's super guard to block. But this fight, it seems like even if you use a regular dodge or a super guard, you still lose a character. They come back after 3 turns, but during this I could never figure out the best way to avoid that attack. In any case, the boss fights just take a really long time to do, and if you haven't been replacing your weaker power glyphs with better ones, you might be underpowered for them. More or less, they can be monotonous, and I just wish there was a bit more variation than just having one, usually one anyway, gimmick that makes them somewhat different. Anyway, after we escape, Anne tries to convince the Draken not to go through with this, but they do it anyway. This actually does stop the white monster, but the enveloping darkness takes hold of Rick, and so, in an attempt to save him and everyone in the world, Tox seems to absorb all the darkness into him, which turns him to stone. I guess if he hadn't done that, the world would have been destroyed, but it was just an act out of saving his brother that also saved the world? Who'd have thunk it? So, time goes by and everyone's life has improved somewhat, and it seems the world is striving toward peace with all the races and ensure this never happens again. It ends on a somewhat decent note, but then... Vax is alive? How? Oh wait, the game is over, which means nothing matters anymore. All the characters can roam free, including Tox, which means you can take part in New Game Plus related events or finish collecting treasures and the like. Of course, if you're like me and picked anything but the hard difficulty, you won't be able to do the new stuff, so you must do New Game Plus from the beginning to get them on the same difficulty. But otherwise, that's the 10th line. For a short game, it isn't too bad. I actually liked the kind of story they told. I liked the characters and what they go through. It's just that, again, I wish it were longer. Maybe better balanced on some gameplay issues, like the whole platforming system in general. Made up a lot of the playtime, though I guess in a way this means you could beat this in less than 10 hours, if you know what you're doing, because I was able to beat it in around 12 hours on normal difficulty. The battle elements are at least unique and interesting, so if anything, I'd like to see that again in a game with a much longer story. We only see like one continent's worth of a world, so hopefully they revisit it and expand upon the lore. I mean, who knows, maybe they'll make a sequel. I'll also say that, visually speaking, it looks pretty cool, with how well they integrate the 16-bit styled characters with the digitally drawn backgrounds. It really does bring out a feeling of old school games while having a relatively good soundtrack. The people who made this did really well putting this one together, and would like to see what else they do in the future. Overall, for those who enjoy playing indie games and want to give an RPG a try, check this one out. It certainly has the makings of something good. It might be worth watching the studio from now on. So that clears out the Patreon requests for this month. Next time, we have our bonus objective. It will technically be the first Christmas video, but I'll decide what I want to do for the second. I'll see you then.